Hello class, welcome to lesson 4.5 in module 4, and we call this 4.5 because on our classwork it is combined with the previous lesson. They sort of group these together, but I figured the concepts are different enough to where we could separate them and take a look at the notes. Here is the first half of the notes. If you'd like to copy those down, pause it now. And the second half of the notes. Go ahead and pause. Go ahead and pause it now. Alrighty. So, like the title indicates, today we are going to be looking at properties of multiplication and addition. Now, the question we start off with is pretty basic. What are properties? Kind of a new word. We've heard of it in other contexts, but in math, what is it? So the answer here, a property is a rule or pattern that are constant in mathematical expressions. Okay, so it's rules or patterns that are constant in expressions. We will be taking a look at three of them, three of the most basic properties that we see in math. The names of the properties sort of give us a clue as to what they are about. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at this first one, which we call the additive identity property. So right off the bat, we know from the title that it has to do with an addition problem because we have additive here, and identity, which we talked about a couple lessons ago, refers to the fact that the original number we start with doesn't change, that it keeps its identity. So we have an addition problem where the value doesn't change, and that's the rule. So let's take a look at the description here. It just says add 0 to any value and the value doesn't change. So the additive identity property says a pretty basic thing that you probably all already know, is that if you add 0 to any number, that number doesn't change. And I wrote value here because sometimes we don't have numbers, sometimes we have letters here or variables. So if we start with G and we add 0, we just have G, okay? And this works for anything. If you have bananas and you add nothing to it, you have bananas. So something plus 0 equals that exact same something. The identity doesn't change. G is where we start and G is where we end. Okay. The next property is pretty similar to that one, called the multiplicative identity property. Okay, so right off the bat we know from the name that it has to do with multiplication, and same, it has to do with the identity of our first value not changing at the end. So the multiplicative identity property looks like this. If you multiply 1 by any value, the value doesn't change. Okay, very similar to adding 0, like we did here. Plus 0 doesn't change G. Here, times 1 doesn't change G. We have G times 1 equals G. You could plug in anything for G. You could plug in 5, 6, 7, 8, bananas, apples, oranges, whatever. If you multiply anything times 1, you're just left with that same anything. And then the last one is a little bit more, takes probably a little bit more thinking, but also I think it's pretty straightforward. We have the commutative property of addition and multiplication. Now this title is a little bit longer, but right away we know that it'll involve addition and or multiplication. And commutative just means exchangeable. So basically it just means that you can exchange the order of addition and multiplication problems and it doesn't change. So here in our description it just says the order doesn't matter when adding or multiplying. So in our examples we have 3 plus G is the exact same thing, equals G plus 3. 3 plus G equals G plus 3. Pretty simple. Down here it's the same thing. 3 times G equals G times 3. The order doesn't matter. So let's say we plug in a number here for G. Let's say G equals 5, right? So 3 plus 5 equals 8, right? And 5 plus 3, we flip the order, still equals 8. So for the addition, we know that works. Now if we move on here, and g still equals 5, let's say we have 3 times 5 equals 15, and if we flip the order, 5 times 3 still equals 15. So the commutative property of addition and multiplication just means that the order doesn't matter. Now, so quick recap. We've got the additive identity, which means if you add 0, nothing changes. Got the multiplicative identity, which means if you multiply it by 1, nothing changes. And the commutative property of addition and multiplication, which just means you can change the order of the expression and it doesn't change the answer. So hopefully now we can answer this question. What are properties? Thank you and goodbye.